Time for VUC. In our 11th year, with us on our journey this year, Simwood.com. Simwood can turn you as a developer into a telco. Greenfield Tech. Go to greenfield.tech and see how they can make your tech dreams both feasible and affordable. Our conference bridge is the best you'll ever find at zipdx.com. VUC.me is hosted on Bluehost. And our worldwide local rate dial-ins are provided by voxphone.com. And now to our live announcer, where this is VUC671 for November 10th, 2017, entitled Beyond Windows, OS 10 and Linux, Chromebooks and Tablets. I forgot the colon, though. So we're going to be talking about this in a second, and the reason is that, well, one of the reasons is that we don't have a guest, and the other reason is that I was considering buying one of these things at some point. Unfortunately, and maybe somebody can comment on this as well, what I've noticed is that the availability of Chromebooks is much higher in the United States than anywhere else. And I'm talking about the one I was looking at was Asus, and any of the models I looked at are not available here in France. I didn't look in the UK, did not look in the UK, but their store is very US centric. So there's a very limited number of Chromebook models available in continental Europe anyway. Amazon has a couple. When you go to their site, by the way, their site, I'm sorry, if you're talking Asus now, you go to the Asus site, they are trying to purvey a lot of their laptops and convertibles. They have some nice looking stuff. But if you want a Chromebook and you want to pay between, say, $260 and $450, there's a very limited choice, at least what I found here. And they're only sold through things like Amazon, and Amazon only has a couple of different models. So that's one of the problems I'm having now, and anybody who wants to comment on that, that's fine. Oh, I know that Michael actually has a Chromebook, but you bought it, what, a couple of years ago, right?
No, actually, I bought it in the spring. I bought it in May of this year. But what I bought, and I'm quite prepared to share it, share a picture of it as soon as I get my little NDI camera loaded. What happens is strip is visible. Okay, there's a little story, and the story sort of explains it a bit. We were going to go on vacation to where were we going? Oh yeah, we were going to Hawaii. We went on vacation to Hawaii. We did, and my wife wanted a laptop for the purposes of this vacation, which she's never owned before. And over my shoulder there on the little wine fridge, you'll see my Lenovo, which I quite like, but it's kind of vintage. So what I did was I set up a profile for her on the Lenovo, said it's yours, you can have it, made it so it was as if it was her desktop. And she does not like to share. So ZipDX had a little project that involved using some low-end Chromebooks. And I thought, okay, I'll get a Chromebook because if I'm not doing this kind of video production or Photoshop work, I'm in the browser anyway. And but what I did is I went and I got one of these, which I will now switch to. This is, my apologies for the quality of the video, but this is a Chromebook Pixel, which is the 2013 version of the top-of-the-line Chromebook that was $1,200 when it first launched. And you can't really tell, but it is a beautiful metal alloy case.
Yeah, it looks quite Apple-esque, doesn't it? Looks like a...
It does. It is a splendid machine, and if you go look at any of the reviews of it, they're fantastic. It came with LTE built into it, and a special Verizon deal where you get 100 meg a month for free for the life of the machine.
100 meg?
Yeah. Verizon reneged on that offer quite quickly, in fact, and I don't know how many Google sold, but it's a splendid machine. Not at $1,200. That's sort of outrageous. But you could buy them in the spring for $350, and so I thought that, okay, I'll get one. it's so nice that I went and looked for the 2015 second generation version of it, which had a faster CPU and much improved battery life. But those are very, very rare. And if you can find them, even used, they're still going for $1,000. But they're hard to find. But this one, so I've had it, I guess, 6 months. It's a splendid machine. If you're in Chrome, I love it.
And how much did you pay for that one, Michael?
$370 US.
That has got to be a bargain.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's one of these things where if you just close your eyes and grab hold of it and type on it and whatnot, it feels like you have a MacBook Pro in your hands.
Okay, so the hardware is definitely a plus. What other pluses or minuses have you experienced with this?
Well, the hardware is great. The display is great. The keyboard is quite good. It's backlit, which I like.
And the LTE, you don't get to use that.
Well, you know what? I knowing that we're going to talk about it, I pulled the little SIM card out to see if I could drop a SIM in it. But my cell phone has a micro SIM, and I don't have a regular mini SIM to drop in it. So I'm going to go get one. I feel that it will work with my T-Mobile account, although I'm not sure if the radio works on T-Mobile's frequencies, but I'm willing to give it a shot. The downsides are the battery life. This has an i5 3247. It actually has the very same CPU as my X1 Carbon. The battery life on it is not great. It's only about 4 hours, and it does get warm if you're working actually on your lap.
Yeah, that's one of the characteristics of having a reasonably beefy processor in there. It just tends to eat the battery, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, the second gen one, which has an i5 50-something series, I mean, a much newer CPU, did get 9 hours of battery life. So the changes...
And that's very good for an i5, because i5s are quite heavy on battery, aren't they?
Yeah. And the other downside to having this one, which is a 2013 vintage, is Google did not see fit. Google has a stated policy of 5 years of software upgrades for Android and Chrome devices. But they don't do BIOS updates. And because they don't do BIOS updates, this one will never see the release of Android that allows it, or the release of Chrome OS that allows it to run Android apps. There are people, a handful of people who have side-loaded an Acer release onto it, which then allows you to run Android apps alongside Chrome OS. But I tinkered with that this week, but didn't have enough time to actually get it done. So what are we getting at? Oh, it has a display port on it. If you want to watch Netflix, we actually used it for watching Netflix on a big TV. We took a display port HDMI adapter, and that worked fine. I don't have any complaints. If anything you can do in the browser, you can do on this machine, and well. In fact, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say two things. From going back a minute or two, I was going to say that I'm sure the battery, the decision of the amperage, the strength of the battery is probably partly the weight, because these have to be lightweight. Otherwise, they're, that's one of the things that a Chromebook is lightweight, like a MacBook Air. So I'm assuming that one of the decisions they had to make, the compromise on the older Pixel, yeah, it is a Pixel, right? It's called. Yeah. That's another thing, by the way, that Google and their Pixel phone and anyway, everything's a Pixel, right?
Yeah, it gets a little confusing, yeah.
But anyway, that must be a consideration. The other thing is Bob Bowles said, and of course we would all say amen to this, any Android SIP client working well on Chromebook would be great, would be awesome, he said. Just quote him.
Yeah, well, and so what surprises me, and I'm getting a USB headset out here just because I'm going to need it in a minute. I will join this. But the amount of stuff that just works on the Chromebook when you plug it in. So for example, standard USB audio class USB audio devices, you plug it in, the Chromebook sees it, immediately sets it up, makes it the primary device. It's just, pardon my French, it's freaking awesome how intuitive it is. Because you don't have to change any settings. It just says, if you've added a device, you must want to use it. So when you plug in a second monitor, it will ask you how you want to use it, whether you want to use it as a mirrored output or as an extended desktop, and then it just does it. You don't have to go looking for a setting. Although you can.
Is it possible for you to call ZipDX via the WebRTC? You mentioned WebRTC and IRC. Is it possible to use that client on the Chromebook?
Sure. In fact,
I don't know what it's based on, but we know it's WebRTC, but I don't know if it's.
I have the dashboard open just now. So give me a second here. We will get into web phone. Allow. Here comes me. Hang on, I'm going to mute myself here. Okay. So this is me on ZipDX.
Completely different audio.
And we're seeing the lag, of course, but that's normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's normal. And you guys are a bit loud. I'm going to have to turn you down. It just works. And in fact, if I were to join the Hangout, here, we'll hang up this.
I'd like to hear you compare the audio on the Hangout, because the audio doesn't sound wideband. Is it the headset?
Oh, it could be the headset in this instance. Yeah, this is a VXI.
It doesn't sound bad at all. I mean, it's perfectly understandable.
Just happened to be close at hand. I can tell you a couple of other tricks about this, but just give me a second. I will get onto that and bail on that.
While he's doing that, Bob Bowles is in the.
Okay, there you go.
Ah, here he comes.
This is yeah. So this is now the camera. Okay, it's not a fabulous camera.
It's fine.
But it's adequate. It's got the CPU grunt to do a good job though. And one of the weird things about this particular model is it has a 4:3 aspect display, which they did deliberately. It's a very high res display. In fact, it's so high res, it's comparable to what Apple would call a Retina display. It's so high res that its normal setting is about half resolution, so that mere mortals can see it, because it's only a 12-inch screen.
And you pointed out a couple of days ago when we started talking about this that when you buy a Chromebook, a lot of the Chromebooks are something like 1370, some weird. They're not really, in general, well, at least say the $260 one. Any of those on the lower end are barely 720p.
Right, and now what we are using them for is a little project where we use them basically as WebRTC audio clients. But they do all the right things. And one of the things you should know about Chromebooks is that they're the fastest selling computers, certainly in North America now, primarily because school systems are buying them up by the hundreds.
Really?
Yeah. Early on, when schools were getting, lots of computers, one computer for every kid, right down to elementary school, they were using iPads, and that turned out to be
expensive
and a management nightmare. And Chrome OS is now the big thing for that.
Yeah, because they can be controlled centrally from an administrative point of view.
And they could also be recycled if they're not giving them away by any. I don't know how that's working, but schools could. And Bob says every school I know in Eastern Massachusetts is using Chromebooks, just as Michael says. Thank you, Bob. Yeah. Bob should join us. I mean, I think he's on.
Yeah, I've just tried to send him the.
He's on ZipDX. For some reason, Bob doesn't want to get on the video, but
he's in his pajamas. I know.
Probably.
So one of the things that I have learned when Chromebooks first came out, and Chromeboxes particularly, you had to be really picky about what you connected to them, because if you connected up, say, a USB Ethernet adapter, it probably wouldn't work, or a USB audio headset, it may or may not work. These days, though, they're pretty good. If you plug in a Logitech camera or any standard USB video class device, it's just going to work. USB audio. I even plugged in a Behringer audio interface so that I could get balanced audio I/O, and it worked. It just worked, and it worked perfectly. So they're pretty slick in that regard.
Yeah.
Who else has experience? Everybody.
Well, it's interesting. We've been talking about Michael's Chromebook, but it's the Chromebook of 2013, and it's probably worthwhile just focusing on what's happened between 2013 and 2017, because you know that these things have not stood still; they have evolved.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there is this new, what do they call it? It's not a Chromebook, or it's the Google Pixel Book. Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
Okay, it's half the thickness, a third less weight. It has an i7 in it, or it can have an i7 in it. It has a wonderful display. It is, however, you know, $1,000 to $1,600, and one wonders what the penetration is going to be at that price point. Where does that machine end up going, other than inside Google itself?
Well, I think they are selling them, but the thing to do, obviously, is to do what you did, Michael, and just wait a year and a half, wait till the new model comes out, then snap up yesterday's premium level device at half the price.
That's not what we do. I suppose that's what we were doing, exactly like I did with this one.
So what have you got there, Corrado?
This is an HP Pavilion X2. It's a hybrid that could be a tablet, touchscreen, but has a keyboard, a standard keyboard like anyone else. It's running Windows 10 and is now running the Hangout pretty well. If I switch over to the microphone in this one, instead, you could see probably me now. That's from this little, the 11-inch top, palm top, web top, whatever you want to call it.
The audio sounds good, Corrado, but the image and there's obviously some kind of a connectivity lag or something,
or processor bottleneck.
No, definitely is the processor.
Okay.
Atom, but I can see you, all of you, perfectly well.
Yeah, it's workable, but it's not what one would call broadcast quality.
No, absolutely not.
And by the way, we kind of promised to actually compare a lot of solutions from I used to, say iPad, the larger iPads and the iPad Pro are hugely expensive. So if we're going to compare all of these things, you have to figure out a couple of things. First of all, you have to figure out what budget. Well, let me just finish the sentence, James, and then we'll go for it. You have to figure out the budget, and everyone knows, because this has been this topic of a million articles. You have to figure out what you're doing exactly, because you can't edit video. If anybody says you can, maybe you can, but you're not going to be doing anything serious in video. I think that, to me, there's a key thing which has to do with whether you can run Android apps or not, and how limited that might be. And for some reason, I don't know why, there's a very specific list of Chromebooks that can run. It isn't just the Android version. In other words, there are certain hardware that can run Android. Sorry, it isn't the Chrome version only, or the Edge. There are only a certain number, I might say almost a handful right this minute, maybe 10, that can actually run Android apps. This said, and this gets back to my initial comment, James, before you take it, if we're going to compare all of these different solutions, as much as I don't care to own an iPad, the iPad is absolutely the richest app space. It can do almost anything, and with the proper hardware, let's put it that way. So as Michael was talking about earlier, you can do professional video mixing. The iPad can serve as a control surface for it. I know that you can do incredible multi-track audio recording. You can do composition. I mean, you can do anything on an iPad. Now, as soon as you go to Android and you're off of iOS, it's already a little less flexible, maybe a lot less even. There's lots of great Android apps, but there are very few that are going to replace any of the creative elements that you can do on iOS. James, take it away.
Yeah, amplifying on what Randy just said there. I've just got myself an iPad Pro, quite an expensive purchase. They're not cheap, but there are a number of characteristics which for me are really important. One of them is this ability to run the iOS apps, and as Randy said, the Apple App Store thing is incredibly rich. You can get an app to do just about anything, and the great advantage of running it on the iPad Pro is you've got this combination of a really powerful platform, coupled with the fact that they're really good quality apps which are then sandboxed, and so I find that the reliability of apps running on the iPad Pro is a lot better than I would find trying to run an equivalent kind of macOS app on my MacBook. Because you know what I'm like. I play with too many things and have too many windows, and the net result is apps tend not to work too well on my MacBook. Whereas I can turn to my iPad Pro, which has got a big screen, lots of pixels, and the thing is almost guaranteed to work every time. And that's great for me.
So here's a question about, because we are talking about portability and we're talking about using this stuff possibly on the road, or even if it's at home, it's the lightweight thing. What hardware do you need? Take it from my standpoint, I cannot type on a phone, and I'm not comfortable typing, frankly, on the screen. So we're talking now about keyboards. Yeah, I knew you did.
And I've got a keyboard clipped on the bottom. And for this type of thing, it really is necessary. Having said that, I think I made...
What is that? Tell us what that is.
It's a clip-on keyboard. It's got a magnet. Well, you can either have the Apple one. Dear old Simon Woodhead decided to go for the Apple one. I went for the alternative, A, because it was slightly cheaper, but B, it was slightly more feature rich, had more bells and whistles. So we decided that we would then compare and contrast. I think I made the right choice, even though it's not Apple branded. It's a very feature rich keyboard. It does lots of things. But just coming back to what I was going to say, I think I made a mistake. With the benefit of hindsight, I would not have got the really big iPad Pro. I should have gone for the middle-sized one. The reason for that is that because it's so flipping big, I've ended up with a device which weighs about the same as my MacBook Air, and there's really no benefit in. Well, I've now got two big devices. Whereas if I'd gone for the middle-sized iPad Pro, if you look at the specifications, the screen is actually better on the middle-sized one, and it's faster and it's cheaper. So I should have gone for that.
James, I have a question. I have an important question for you. Could you now, this is a math question though, so get your pencil out. Could you calculate, no, you need a pencil, you need a bigger pencil, one like this. James, how much weight would you need to carry in your suitcase if you had a device for every SIM card?
Ooh. Well, if you said every SIM, that'd be easy.
That you have. Every SIM that you have.
But remember, the SIM is not the card bit. The SIM is actually the code that's in the UICC. So being smart, I say, well, I go for a multi-IMSI device. In fact, something like this. And again, one of the reasons why I got the iPad Pro is it's got an eSIM in it, and so you can have multiple IMSIs, multiple profiles live at the same time.
Right. And I've spoken to a couple of people, and you're the only person I know who's actually experienced this, unless Corrado or anybody else, Michael or anybody, and maybe Bob Bowles who's listening. If anybody has a device that has this eSIM, I think, James, you may be the only person among us who has
Yeah.
experienced eSIM and set it up. In other words, you've actually set it up. You tried it on a couple of things.
Yeah, we were anticipating that the new iPhone 10 would have an eSIM in it, which then offers both data, messaging, and voice services. But Apple, in their infinite wisdom, decided not to do that. And Google have beaten them off the blocks because the new Pixel 2 does, in fact, have an eSIM in it.
Really?
Yes, you didn't know that.
No, but I understand that all of these eSIMs depend on partnerships with companies. Obviously, TruePhone is one of them.
With mobile network operators.
Right.
And rather interestingly, the only carrier in MNO in inverted commas, who is supporting that Google eSIM right now is Google Fi, so Google's own operator. So
what a coincidence!
What a coincidence! So they were. That's why they were able to get it out of the door so quickly, because they didn't have to play with other people. I'm sure that Apple will be talking to lots of different other operators, and we know what their strategy is. That they tend not to launch first. They put a lot of effort into getting it right, so that when they do launch it, it's pretty good experience. They don't always get it right. Like, remember Apple Maps?
Oops.
Oops. Yeah, most of the time it works. And there are things, you've heard me talk about my AirPods. They're actually very, very, very good because they got it right. And even the dreaded Apple Pencil, absolutely magical bit of kit. What you can do with this. So, Michael, you're shaking your head.
Oh, no.
Michael doesn't like. No, he's talking.
No, Michael, we can't hear you.
No, I think he's on a support.
Muted.
That's why.
I think the AirPods are an affectation. I just have no interest in that. However, I do have a question for the collective wisdom here, and that is, what role does price play in any of this? Because iPads tremendously expensive.
Hugely.
And one of the advantages of most of the Chromebooks is that they're quite cost effective, and so once you get down under, call it $500 or maybe for some people $400 or something like that. I mean, you still have a really serviceable machine.
That's true, but there are other criteria like coolness. Going back a year or so, when I used to routinely travel on the train up to London, we used to regularly laugh at the poor old chap who had the Microsoft
Nexus 7?
No, the Microsoft tablet thing. I can't even remember what it's called.
Surface?
Surface, yeah. We always used to laugh at him because
Surfaces were lame, but Surface Pros actually are rather impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, let's get into that. Now that you mentioned that, and Michael, you know something about this, I think. There's been a couple of generations. How many? 3, maybe even 4. The initial Surface only ran Windows NT or not NT.
No,
RT. I'm sorry. It ran some lame thing that was very limited, though. What was it? Wasn't it RT? Was it called?
Yeah, it ran Windows RT. It was a sort of a dedicated version of the OS for that hardware, for that CPU platform.
But very limited in apps and so on. So like a Chromebook, but not hip. Look, it looks like Corrado has one.
Well,
what do you have there?
It's the same device I was showing before, but it's also a tablet by itself.
Oh, he's ripped the keyboard off.
Yeah, you can take
but it's running Windows 10, you said, right?
Windows 10, but in tablet mode.
Okay.
Automatically.
Nothing wrong with that.
So it's a hybrid.
Sorry, you said, Randy, you said there's nothing wrong with that. It's Windows.
Well, I wouldn't touch it. You're right. I wouldn't touch it, but I have heard from everybody that 10 is absolutely the best version of Windows that's ever come out.
Well, that's probably true.
Yeah. No, what I mean,
call outs for assistance on Windows 10 in my line of business has collapsed literally by 50% since Windows 10 came on instead of Windows 7.
So it only took them like 25 years to learn to do it right, I guess.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, but that's an oversimplification, because if you go back years and years, right, they got hauled into federal court for incorporating on disk compression stack, right? That became an antitrust case, which then leads to, well, things like strategically, we really don't want to incorporate PDF creation into the OS because that's yet another example of subsuming a critical function into the OS and leading to potential antitrust issues. So it's kind of weird. But as Corrado noted in Wire a couple of days ago, things like print to PDF built into the OS makes perfect sense and reduces your support headache tremendously.
Yep. Yeah, and the complexity of antivirus, and firewalls and everything from third parties that you can this how much you want Windows Defender. It does a basic, very baseline job of protecting the system. So you don't need
any of the nagware. The free antivirus is always offered.
Exactly.
I just read today, by the way, that Microsoft is, unless this was the Onion and I didn't notice, that Microsoft is offering their, is it Bitdefender? Is that what it's called? The thing that you
Windows
just
Defender.
said?
Windows Defender. Yeah.
It's Windows Defender.
It's being offered for OS 10 and something else. I forgot. Linux. Is that true?
Oh, well.
Here again, is
that a joke or is that the truth?
Well, I would expect that the uptake that they get from Linux users, I mean, if you've got something like an Ubuntu platform, probably the last thing you're going to do is put something from Microsoft on it, and in particular, an antivirus thing.
No, one thing is probably what you're referring to is that they are collecting all information from the field, from the antivirus, from the Windows Defender sensors they have around, and offer those information collected to everyone. So it can be shared for antiviruses for OS X or something else. I think I've read something like that, but it's not the standard Windows Defender, but a different platform that is on Windows 10 Enterprise, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's something like that.
When I looked it up, there's a thing called Bitdefender. Maybe I'm confusing. Maybe I saw an announcement for Bitdefender, which does say...
No, Bitdefender I don't think is a Microsoft product, but there's something. Windows Defender D something, DTH, DHT or something, is included in Windows 10 Enterprise, in all the enterprise instruments, including management of computers and accounts. That is using that collective intelligence and that crowdsourcing of what's going on, including new threats, 0 days, and then is offered to some third-party antivirus platforms. That's something that I have from off the top of my head. I don't remember where I read it, and it was pretty recent, probably the beginning of this week.
I'll tell you, one of the reasons why I bought a new computer not long ago was because the antivirus that I was using released a new iteration, right? A next generation, like not a dot release, but a full release, full point release. And in so doing, it became
rendered the computer unusable.
Yeah, it became more taxing on the computer, and things that I was doing that were sort of near the edge of the old computer's capabilities just fell off the edge, and so I ended up buying a new computer. But that's because my old computer had run Windows 7 and had been migrated forward to Windows 10, but I already had the antivirus licenses. Now I just don't bother with that.
Here's what I was talking about real quick, if you want to take a look at this. Crosspost, Windows Defender, okay. So what is Windows Defender ATP?
ATP, yes, exactly. It's a different type of product that is on Windows 10 Enterprise. It's not on the standard Windows 10 or more professional.
But apparently it considers itself as pretty secret, pretty cool, because it seems to be a big deal.
It considered itself pretty cool,
I guess.
If you think of it this way, though, the very fact that if I'm working at a corporation and I've got several thousand Windows laptops and desktops that I have to admin, the fact that the a reasonable antivirus is built in is a big win. It is a huge win because it's sort of an item off my tray, off my plate, right?
Yeah.
that it dovetails with the central management scheme that we've got set up. It isn't something independent. Huge win.
Not forgetting the additional cost of
Yeah.
a number of licenses for an enterprise of an antivirus that, as far as we can see and we can tell by experience, also lowers productivity. So
I do have
double-edged sword.
in Wire. I do have a question about tablets because I've struggled with Android tablets, having had Nexus 7s that I loved, but they got long in the tooth and eventually failed. And now I bought the NVIDIA K1s, which are very capable but have been problematic and are now discontinued. So Android tablets, hey? Who makes them? Anybody? There are a few out there, but it seems like Samsung and Asus, and that's it.
Well, I had a phablet. I spoke about last week, a 7-inch Acer phone pad that was a telephone, a mobile phone, and a tablet, 7-inch. But I couldn't use many of the applications because they were developed for phones. So the layout and the size of the display was improper. It wasn't going where it should.
So that's based on Android.
Yes, Android based. It was on Android KitKat, if I'm not mistaken. It's still there, working along as a tablet itself without a SIM in, and it works pretty well for the age. But
well, that's a good segue to bring us on to just mentioning or just talking very briefly about general Android tablets, because you can now go out and you can get Android tablets for very little. And you can use them as appliances. And was it last week or the week before we were talking about bolting them on the wall, or you were?
I believe Corrado actually has a tablet in his home security system. James, I want to back up for a second because I wanted to ask you a question about the iOS, the iPad universe, which is a very simple one. When they first came out, when the iPad first came out, I believe there were actually developers had to develop 2 versions of apps because the screen was so much bigger than a phone. I guess that they eventually moved on to apps that knew to to adapt to different screen sizes. What's the situation today? Because what Corrado just said, it's true on Android. I have apps right now.
Yeah, it's
on a large phone. I'll show you one, in fact.
Yeah, well, the situation, that situation where you have iPhone apps and iPad apps is still true, but there are some apps that are able to adapt to the size of the screen as well. So there are some apps that you can get on both in iPad and iPhone App Store.
I think the problem was the different types of resolution of different type of Retina screens with more pixel per inch.
Yeah,
so it was
absolutely.
Really difficult.
And it really depends on how modern the app is.
Right.
Whether it can handle it or not. What do you?
I'm just showing it as an example. Even if you can't read that, it says Start Test. The button on this app, it's sensorly. Plus, it's a pretty widely distributed. Well, you can see that the button is half off screen. You can still click it.
That's an Android, isn't it?
It is, but this is a particularly tall or large screen. Same thing with the app.
Sorry, Randy. What happens if you rotate the screen?
I don't think you can on that app. That's another thing. Some apps will not allow, and you can't. Okay. However, I was about to say that the Tribi app also has that problem because you can't rotate it, and it also had problems because, let's face it, the difference between Android, one of the most important differences between Android and Apple is what? Apple controls all the hardware, and there's only a couple of iterations. In fact, whatever they've made. Period.
And that simplifies the complexity for the developer quite a lot.
Well, and for us, for the user too, because it's an advantage. One of Apple's main advantages is the same thing as their disadvantage, which is that they have a fascist regime in place. Basically, I'm joking, of course, but on the App Store, and you could be thrown out, and that's the end. actually Google probably does the same in Android. But the point is that since they control the hardware, you're not going to have that problem. I don't think there are apps in the Apple Store that would do that half button thing that I just showed you, for example. If there are, they're not very good apps.
Well, it depends, because there are multiple versions of SDK, software development kit, for Android, for different platforms and different iteration of the operating system. Whereas for iOS, there's just one SDK that Apple has. Multiple manufacturers like HTC, Samsung, and so on that use Android have different GPUs, CPUs. So it's a different ecosystem, and it's probably more complicated to unify under a single SDK where you prepare an application with that software development kit and renders the same way everywhere.
Yeah,
and another precision about Android. Sorry, James, just I'm moving with the flow here. The other thing about Android is that you have several different different versions of Android. You've got the pure Google experience, which would have been, I believe, you could say that the Nexus 5, right? When it first came out, that was their first phone, the LG, I think it was.
Yeah.
That
Any
phone,
Motorola Moto G something.
Right. That's right. That's right. So there were a couple of. This is called the pure Google experience, where it just, you know, I think you're kind of forced to have their basic apps, you know, Gmail and all of that, Maps. But the point is, anyway, that there are, since then, there have been, Samsung, of course, has their version. I'm not going to say anything bad about Samsung. I don't care for it, but a lot of people are in love with it. I have a OnePlus phone that uses Oxygen, and before Oxygen OS, it used, now I'm struggling with the name, but it used another Cyanogen, which died. I still have a phone that uses that. So the point is, this is another little dilemma with Android. You've got fractioning from hardware, and you also have a little bit of fractioning in software, because Android software may not work on your iteration of Android if it's like OnePlus's Oxygen OS. The good side of that is they put some other stuff in there that you might have liked to have with the Google. Sorry, James, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, well, another really great advantage of Android is that you can run it on multiple platforms, including, so you've got not only got the really cheap Android handsets and Android tablets, which are incredibly good value for money, but you also run Android on things like this. This is a CADAS Vim. You might have seen it before. Here's one that I prepared earlier. It's a bit like a Raspberry Pi, but on steroids. And I've got two of these here. I've got one running Ubuntu. The other one, this one, is running Android. And yeah, it's a really grunty, powerful bit of hardware that you can run some really quite high-end, you know, video type applications. This one's got 4K support on it, graphics support on it. And awesome, and not a lot of money. And then you can go for things like this. So this is an Android stick, and you plug that into the HDMI socket on your TV. And again, incredibly cheap, but incredibly powerful. And you have access to the whole range of Android applications, and relatively bomb-proof, because not as bomb-proof as the Apple stuff, but obviously. But sorry,
whose Android stick is that? Is that Google?
Oh, no, it's a generic Chinese one.
Oh, one point of order: be careful with Chinese phones, because very, very careful, because they are always planted with something that is running in the background to intercept traffic and so on. So careful with Chinese clones.
And as paranoid as that sounds, it's true. It really is true.
An advanced question then for that Android stick idea. Do you know any that deliver 4K video? 4K
yeah, there are. Let's see if we can find a link. Yeah, talk amongst yourselves.
Meanwhile, in defense of Android and the comparison between Android and Apple and how easy it is to develop on the platform, iOS is closed source. The source of that is not unknown, whereas Android is open source. So anyone can take the core of that and add on, like Samsung did, their own skin, their own applications that are integrated in your operating system so deeply that you cannot remove them. So it's a different paradigm. Either you accept to be in an enclosed ecosystem protected and mollycoddled by Apple, or you're open to open source and the scrutiny that comes with that from everyone, and all the branches that go out and are then different to rein in and get something solid.
True, very true.
Right, just answering your question, Michael, I'm looking at an Android 6 Wi-Fi TV box, which supports 4K video, complete with remote control. The cost of it, £24.99.
Wow.
Complete in the case. And it's got a quad-core processor with a quad-core Mali 450 MP GPU, 8 gigs of flash ROM, and a gig of DDR3 RAM.
Here's my little project, and I've mentioned it before. It's going to take place in 2019, and that is a streaming media-based digital signage project that will happen at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. And it will basically use the kind of tools that we use here in the production of the VUC, but talk to an array of 70-inch LCDs distributed around the property there over Ethernet. And I'm trying to figure out what the appropriate display device is, because I don't think you can rely on the smarts built into a smart TV. I think it's better to use something like a Chromecast or a box like that.
Are you planning to go Wi-Fi or wired?
Wired.
Okay.
I actually just the other day was able to unplug our Chromecast because I bought one of these. Whoops. Let's see. Share.
What's one of those?
Bought one of these. I've told you guys know about this already.
Yeah.
Bought the X9. You know, these names mean nothing. They're all made.
No, that's a little Android box, is it?
It is, and so as a result, you can put the Netflix app, you can put the Amazon Prime app, you can put the Great Courses Plus app, which I subscribe to briefly. Very interesting. You can put MX Player Pro, which I already own a license to.
And what's the cost of that? Just out of interest.
That was about £50, I would say, something like that. Let me, if I can. I'm on the order. I'm sorry, it was €70.
So that must be a reasonably high end one for 70.
It does, as you saw. It has a little red thing that says 4K, which I can't touch because we only barely have 720p here. But the point is, it works beautifully. It does have an Ethernet. It'll do Wi-Fi. I have an FTP server installed on it so that I can put files on it directly. It has a couple of
USB ports, I suppose.
It has a couple of a USB. I don't know if it's 2 or 3.
I'm guessing it's probably got BGN Wi-Fi as well.
It has Wi-Fi. It will actually do a Wi-Fi hotspot. You can connect to it via its own Wi-Fi if you want.
Okay, what about audio connections? Is it audio solely out through the HDMI socket, or have you got an external?
I wish I could answer that. I think probably it is just HDMI because I don't have any audio, so I didn't look. Let's see if we can.
And I would imagine you probably got support for USB discs on that as well.
Oh, absolutely. There's only 2, and they're kind of close together. The only complaint I have of all of everything I've done with it is that the USB connectors are a little stiff to plug something in, and there's only 2 of them. So I immediately bought a non-powered hub and stuck that on there. I'm just trying to look at compared to. I'm trying to find the specs here. Network TV box, full quad core, 2 gigahertz frequency, ultra high, blah blah blah. System. It's Android 6, Ethernet. Of course, it does Bluetooth. I didn't say
10100 Ethernet.
That's a good question. I didn't look, but I think so. If it's going to do 4K, it probably has gigabit.
And you
probably has gigabit.
You've probably got a card reader slot on there to take SD.
Yep, it does say that, even though I haven't tried it. Video HD takes standards SD, HD, 4K, 2K Ultra HD, and blah, blah, blah. It is not
Yeah.
and what's funny is it says it's not compatible with the Sony Bravia TV, but that's what we have, and it's perfectly compatible. I don't know why they put that in there. But the point is, it obviated the need for the Chromecast. And frankly, I have the first gen Chromecast. You know, I clicked the thing, kept refreshing the page to get the first ones that came out for $35 plus a $10 whatever it was credit or something. But they're not really that great because it's really hard to get it set up. You got to get on the Wi-Fi. You can't do the dream, which is to take it with you to the hotel, because you got to mess around getting on the Wi-Fi.
So your current preferred TV device is that Android box then?
That's the only one I have because we got rid of our ISP's box.
Right. Interesting enough, I have got one of just about everything, and the one TV device that we use all the time now, bizarrely enough, is, have a guess.
Fire Stick.
It is the Amazon device. Yeah.
What do I get for that guess? It was accurate.
Yeah, but the reason for it is some silly reasons. First of all, it's remarkably fast and dependable. It just never has any problems. But the other major usability factor is it's got the Alexa speaking remote control.
Oh, and you like that.
So, well, it's just easier than trying to type things in.
Alexa, turn the lights on.
Yeah, and when you want to watch a certain film or something like that, you just speak it in, press the button, speak it, and it just finds it for you. It just saves you.
Alexa, I want to watch The Maltese Cross. I'm sorry, I can't find that.
Alexa,
I cannot
show me Randy Resnick.
Oh, please.
That'll be another ½ cent for you.
Yeah, it'll be a while.
But no, it's just that silly little thing of just having the push and speak button on the remote control just makes all the difference.
Yeah, because let's be frank, both Netflix and Amazon Prime interfaces on the TV to find something are awful.
Yeah,
fairly atrocious. Yeah,
and you know what? I've tried the remote controls where you flip it over and you've got a little QWERTY keypad, but again, they're fiddly. And at the end of the day, you can't beat press the button and show me this film.
Let me just interject that obviously, maybe it is not obvious, but you can plug a mouse into this X9 that I bought, and I'm sure they're all the same. You can plug a mouse into it because, yes, you put your finger on something interesting. The remote, this is true of cable TV controllers too. If you're going to look for something and you have to go D for every letter, that's not too comfortable.
It's very tedious. And plus,
but you need a mouse.
Yeah, when you're watching TV, you probably don't want a mouse because you're on the sofa or something like that, and you've got nothing to do your mouse against. So
I put the mouse up next
you probably want to have voice control or even body control, where you're doing all this sort of thing.
What was the Microsoft thing that did the?
Well,
what was that?
It's the thing on the Xbox, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's that called?
This is also Eurocentric, gentlemen. What Amazon has proven with the Echo, and you know, Siri comes along and everybody else comes along as well, is that voice is the natural way to do this stuff. So much so that Comcast, the planet's largest cable provider, now has a voice-enabled remote capability for their own set-top box. They call the X1 platform, right? And that's taking it to the masses, and everybody else now is having to do the same. TiVo, I think 2 weeks ago, launched a voice-enabled remote capability for the current generation of TiVo hardware, which we see.
When it comes to voice control, voice UIs, I think it's a close run thing between Amazon and Google. I think Google is, because I've got both. And the Google interface, I find, is a lot more intuitive, and it can do things like recognizing who the speaker is, whether it's me or Sophie, my wife, and it reacts accordingly. So it gets the context better. But the one that we tend to use all the time is the Alexa one, because we kind of got used to it, and it works.
If speaking of, we're getting close to an hour here, and I like to keep these things fairly concise. We've been rattling on and talking about all this stuff about Chromebooks, talking about portables.
Oh, you mustn't forget to mention the IoT kerfuffle of Logitech.
I'm going, right. Thank you for the nice segue. Here it is. So Logitech, a couple of days ago, created a huge outcry by bricking, saying that in March or May, I can't remember what date, the Harmony would be bricked, and people bought this hardware.
Well,
Our friend
model.
Our friend, well, I was just going to say, our friend Dan York did a SoundCloud podcast about it, and it's interesting. There's a much greater consideration here. So after the backlash, Logitech will upgrade all Harmony Link owners, which would have been SOL, by the way, next year. Their hardware that they bought was useless. Dan York's contention was that you're not buying this thing anymore because you own the hardware, but there's no service. So your hardware is worthless. The fact that they came back on this and decided to give people, that's wonderful, and I'm glad for them and everybody else. But the important point is that you buy something, and by the way, the Ring, if Ring went out of business tomorrow, I guess my Ring doorbell may or may not ring, but it certainly wouldn't do most of what it's supposed to do because there's no server anymore.
Yeah, that's one of the downsides of those Internet of Things devices.
Yep.
That they rely on, service providers.
Well, did we cover this last week when we were talking about home automation?
We didn't quite get to it.
Yeah, this is why it's so important to have something like Home Assistant or equivalent running locally within your home, which hopefully, if it's open source, then things will be supported going forwards. But it means that your house can operate without the need for things running somewhere else in the cloud.
You know, people make fun of, or some people have made fun of companies like D-Link because they have security problems or whatever on their cameras. Michael, you know something about this probably. I bought the cheapest, lowest level D-Link surveillance camera, and it doesn't depend on the cloud. Yes, you can, with the higher level models, you can get them to record your stuff and do all kinds of things, but it doesn't depend on it. It is a local unit. It will email me directly with motion detection. And comparing that, which cost 1/5 of what the Ring costs, something like that, it's actually more effective. I'm considering buying a better camera because this is a kind of a crap camera. I mean, it was like a 40 or 50 euro D-Link surveillance
50
camera.
euros, you were ripped off. I've got one here, little D-Link unit with Wi-Fi. And
that's exactly the one. Well, maybe it was 30.
I paid
I don't remember.
18 quid for that.
Well, by now, yeah, they're practically worthless. But the point is, it does the job. It'll email you stills, which means that you've got a permanent record if you care about that. If you care about motion detection, the motion detection works as well as the Ring. The Ring costs over $200. And if I sound annoyed, it's because I am. I didn't realize until talking. Go ahead.
I don't get Ring. I hear people saying nice things about them. The only thing I think of is
don't say nice things.
I think of is those people are not well informed because Ring is terribly unreliable.
Yeah, they're selling it on the concept of an easy out-of-the-box experience. You don't have to fiddle around, but clearly it's not.
And I hate to say horrible things about people, and a lot of us, actually Andy and other friends, Andy Abramson and other friends of ours know this fellow James, and I think you talked to him, Jamie, sorry. I think you talked to him, Michael. And I mean, the human beings involved in this are nice people, and I don't want to say too much bad about it, but I do want to say that they have a nag screen that comes up every day saying, well, if you click this box, you'd have 15 days free. Then tomorrow it's going to be 14. I mean, don't do that. I opted out of it. Now forget that.
So
the thing barely works.
That's why when I did my research, I decided not to go for Ring, but to go for the other one, Skybell.
But did you? But did you?
Well, I went to America. I went around Fry's and the usual places. All I could find was shelf after shelf of flipping Rings. So Ring, or whoever owns Ring, would appear to be spending a lot on marketing.
We did not mention that Ring has lost a judgment that they were sued by ADT or something. And I don't want to go into that in detail, but there was a thing that they're suffering from right now. But this notwithstanding, I would just warn people, if you're going to try to do home security or doorbells and stuff like that, check into it. I didn't. This is my fault. Mea culpa, my problem. I learned only talking to Ken Rice that I didn't realize that it went through the cloud for everything it does. I didn't know that. If I would have known that, I would never have bought it.
But you can reconfigure it so that it doesn't go through the cloud. You can
Ring?
Yes, you can run your Ring with Home Assistant.
Oh God! So this is yet another thing you have to buy.
No, Home Assistant is open source. You run it on a Raspberry Pi or anything else that you've got lying around.
Really?
Yes.
You must give me these instructions, James, after the show.
You weren't listening. You weren't listening last week because we were bouncing up and down saying Home Assistant is really brilliant.
Home Assistant sounds like something you have to go buy and install.
Dan Jenkins was raving about, and I went.
I wasn't. No, I
checked it out, because normally when Dan says things are quite good, they normally are quite good.
Well, then I'll talk to Dan. Instead of you, I'll refer to Dan when I need to know. Anyway, thanks everybody. I think that if anybody has final things that we didn't get to,
a very quick note. If you are going to use a system for your own security, you want the minimum denominator possible. So something simple, something that is working even if there is a thunderstorm. So the security must be your guideline. If it's just CCTV for the sake of it, do it. Otherwise, stay with the consolidated and safe and well-known as working systems.
Well said, Corrado. Anybody else?
Yeah, open source is normally safer than buying Chinese off the shelf, I would say, obviously.
Agreed.
Okay, so Bob Bowles, thank you for joining us. You're going to have to come on the show once in a while.
Open source all the way.
There he is.
Oh, Bob, we're missing you.
Finally said a word.
It was great to hear friendly voices.
Thanks, Bob, and stay in touch, please. And with that, we're going to send a word out to our friend Andy Smith. I'm not going to give any context there, but Andy, we'll see you soon, I hope.
Yeah, it was good to see you earlier this afternoon, Andy.
Right.
And you're looking and sounding really good.
Absolutely. And next week, gentlemen, Dialpad, Craig Walker and his team.
And that will be a good one, because we've been playing with Dialpad, haven't we?
We have been doing intensive in-house testing.
There is such a lot to Dialpad, isn't there?
There is a lot to it, even though it sounded boring when I first heard about it, but it's very interesting. So join us next week. We will be back in something like 7 days and however many hours. See you then.
Bye.